As we continue our sermon series about the legacy of Martin Luther, we're taking time, as you heard this morning, to dive into Luther's concept of law and gospel. This theological breakthrough transformed a terror-stricken monk into the very spark of a reformation. And it's the same insight that can set us free from the exhausting cycle of trying to earn God's approval. But before we get to all of that, we need to remember that Martin Luther didn't grow up dreaming of igniting a reformation. He grew up following his father's dream and was studying to become a lawyer. But one night, Luther was caught in a violent thunderstorm and everything changed. He was convinced that he was about to die, and so he made a desperate bargain with God, and he prayed, "Save me from this storm, and then I'll become a monk." Now here's what's striking about Luther's story. That moment in the thunderstorm when he tried to bargain his way out of death wasn't unusual. That's something I think we all still do today in different ways. In the movie Space Jam, stay with me here. Not expecting where you weren't expecting me to go there, but hang on. In the movie Space Jam, there's a moment that captures exactly what Luther was doing that day in the thunderstorm. In the movie, Charles Barkley, a professional basketball player at the time, loses his talent because aliens steal it from him. Don't worry about it. He can no longer even dribble a basketball. And so there's a scene where we see him on his knees in a church praying. And he starts bargaining with God, trying to get his talent to return. And he says, "I'll never swear again. I'll never get another technical. I'll never trash talk again." Then he thinks for a moment and says, "I'll never go out with Madonna again." In his despair, Charles tries to negotiate. He offers up a list of behaviors that he's willing to give up in order to hopefully win back God's favor. But this desperate bargaining isn't just comedy, it's human nature, I think. Just like Luther in that thunderstorm, just like all of us when our backs are against the wall, we instinctively try to negotiate our way out of trouble. Dear God, if you just help me pass this test, if you just don't let me get caught, if you just save me from this, then I'll be a better person, I'll pray more, I'll go to church more, I'll do better. It sounds ridiculous when we say it out loud. And it seems even more ridiculous when we compare it to a scene in Space Jam. But this mindset I'm describing isn't a joke. I think it's surprisingly close to what a lot of us believe. If I work hard enough, then I'll be worthy. If I keep my family together, God will be proud of me. If I stay out of trouble, I'll be okay. If I'm just kind and decent and clean up after myself, God will reward me. This deal-making mindset is what I like to call soft law. Soft law isn't codified in commandments, but it's more of the cultural air that we breathe. It's the quiet pressure to do more, to be better, to try harder. It tells you that if you just keep it together, God will reward you. And after surviving that lightning storm, this is exactly the type of mindset Luther brought with him into the monastery. This same mind of his that had been trained to parse legal codes now turned obsessively inward, cataloging every possible sin. Legend has it that Martin would confess for hours, sometimes returning to his confessor multiple times in a single day, because he was convinced that forgetting even one transgression would damn him eternally. Can you imagine living that way? Going through each day terrified that one oversight, one unconfessed thought could carry eternal consequences? Luther had escaped that lightning storm, but he trapped himself in something far worse, a spiritual prison where he was never, ever enough. This is what can happen when we try to live only by the law. When we see the world as just a transactional system of pleasing God in order to earn rewards. Eventually you'll burn out, or you'll screw up, or you'll crack under the weight of it, just like Luther did. Because in that system, it's all up to you. That's what makes the law so dangerous. It offers clarity, but no comfort. It gives structure, but no grace. It holds a mirror up to all of your flaws, and it says, fix it. And as Luther can tell us, having the law constantly show us all that we need to fix is exhausting. But what happens then when someone refuses to play by these rules? What happens when someone steps into our performance-driven world and says, this isn't how God works? That's exactly what we see in our gospel passage from Luke this morning. In Luke chapter 6, Jesus walks into a synagogue filled with people who had turned God's law into a trap. He enters the synagogue on the Sabbath, and we're told that there is a man there with a withered hand. Think about this man for a moment. He's probably lived with this disability for years, and maybe he's even heard whispers amongst his peers that his deformity was somehow his fault, that God was punishing him for a sin left unconfessed. This man in the synagogue embodies everything Luther struggled with. The fear that who he is, as he is, could never be enough for God. And Luke tells us that the Pharisees are there watching Jesus very closely as he entered the synagogue that day. Not because they cared about this suffering man, but because they were setting a trap for Jesus. They wanted to see if Jesus would break the religious law that says you cannot work on the Sabbath. But Jesus notices all of this. He sees the man's pain and the oppressive systems at play, and he sees the trap that has been set. And instead of avoiding that trap, Jesus walks right into it. He tells the man to stand up in front of everyone, and he restores the hand. And in doing so, he makes his point abundantly clear. The law should not be a barrier that prolongs human suffering. More than that, Jesus is showing the crowds in the synagogue and the conniving Pharisees that the law is not God's final word. Let me say that again. The law is not God's final word. You see, Jesus didn't come to prop up the religious systems. He came to bring healing and wholeness and abundant life. He came to break people out of the systems that were slowly killing them. Jesus steps into the trap to free the trapped. He walks straight into the mess of legalism and moralism and personal shame that we seem to insist on living under, and he tears it all down. And he still does this for us today. Jesus steps into your shame spiral, into your quiet self-doubt, your defensiveness when criticized, your fear of being found out, your guilt about not being a better spouse or parent or Christian. Jesus steps right into these traps and he says, "This ends with me." Jesus takes all of this unto himself and says, "It is finished." These old systems are killing you, and so I'm putting them to death through me. That's the gospel. This is the truth of the scriptures that Luther rediscovered. That faith isn't a deal we make with God. It's not all up to us to climb our way to God through good behavior, because Jesus has already come down from heaven to pull us out of this mess. Luther, who was once consumed with fear that his mistakes would eternally imprison him, found freedom in these truths. The gospel set him free, and it launched a reformation. And now it's our turn to be reformed ourselves. We get to stop pretending and performing and negotiating with God. Instead of faking it or drowning in shame and guilt, we get to tell the truth about our brokenness and still know we're held in love. We are free to live and to rest, free to screw up, and then free to get back up. Because we are saved by grace through faith. Because Jesus Christ has already done what the law never could. Amen.